It was the autumn of 1987 when 29-year-old Vera Colston found herself standing alone in the middle of 840 acres of Minnesota farmland, watching the taillights of her husband's truck disappear into the gray October dusk. The corn was still in the fields. The first frost was 2 weeks out, maybe less, and the farm's only working combine had a cracked cylinder head that bled coolant the color of rust onto the cold dirt floor of the machine shed. She had 3 weeks to bring in the harvest. She had no crew, no capital, and no one who believed she could do it. Let me set the scene for you, because the land Vera inherited wasn't just a piece of property. It was the Colston homestead, 840 acres of dark Minnesota topsoil that her grandfather had broken with a 2-bottom plow in 1931. Her father, Earl Colston, had farmed it his entire life, the way his father had taught him, with a devotion to the soil that bordered on the spiritual. He had passed away in June of that year, quietly, in the same bed where he was born. And when the lawyers read the will, the farm went to Vera. Every acre, every debt, every rusted bolt of it. Her husband, Glenn, had never liked the farm. He tolerated it when Earl was alive, the way a man tolerates a rain delay impatiently with one eye on the exit. But after the funeral, when the weight of what the inheritance actually meant became clear, his patience dissolved entirely. The farm carried an operating loan, an equipment note on a tractor that still needed work, and a property tax bill that had to be paid by December. Glenn was an electrician. He understood voltage and amperage. He did not understand why a person would sink their life into dirt. "Sell it," he told her the night they came home from the lawyer's office. He said it the way you say something you've been rehearsing for a long time. We clear the debt, pocket the difference, and actually live our lives. Vera didn't answer him right away. She was looking at the kitchen table, at the stack of her father's papers, the farm records, the soil maps, the ledger he kept by hand, every column filled in with his careful, deliberate numbers. She had sat at that same table as a child and watched him run his finger down those columns like he was reading music. "It's not ready to sell," she said. Glenn left on a Thursday morning. He took his toolbox, his good truck, and 2 boxes of clothes. He told her she was sentimental and impractical, and that the farm was going to swallow her whole. He said it with a kind of brittle anger that she recognized, even then, as fear. His fear, not hers. She stood on the porch and watched him go. The silence that settled in behind him was vast and cold, the way Minnesota silence gets in October, when the leaves are down and the sky turns the color of old iron. The next morning she drove into town. Mr. Caldwell's office at First Prairie Savings was small and overheated, the way bank offices always are in small towns. Like the warmth is meant to make you feel comfortable enough to agree to things. He had been her father's banker for 20 years. He knew the farm, knew its history, knew its dirt. He also knew, with the polished certainty of a man who managed numbers for a living, that the Colston farm was a marginal operation being held together by the stubbornness of one aging man who was now gone. He folded his hands on the desk and looked at her the way doctors look at people when they're about to say something the patient isn't going to like. "Vera," he said, "I want to be straightforward with you because your father deserved that from me, and so do you." He paused. "The operating note comes due in March. The equipment loan has 2 payments left, and the combine situation, I've heard it's serious. You're looking at a harvest that may not come in on time, on equipment that isn't reliable, with no hired labor and no liquid reserves." He picked up a pen and set it down again. "There's a land investment group out of Minneapolis. They've been acquiring parcels in this county all year. They're offering good prices, and they'd take the whole thing as one parcel, clear all the notes, and leave you with a check large enough to start over." Vera looked at the framed photo on his wall. A photo of downtown Millhaven from the 1950s, all the storefronts still open, the grain elevator in the background. She thought about her father sitting in this same chair, in this same office, for 30 years. The harvest will come in, she said. The loans will be paid. Mr. Caldwell studied her for a long moment. He was not a cruel man. He genuinely believed he was offering her a lifeline. How? He asked. That combine needs a cylinder head. That's not a cheap repair, and it's not a fast one. Harvest window in this county closes in 3 weeks. I know when harvest closes, Mr. Caldwell, she said. I've been watching it close my whole life. She drove home on county roads she could have navigated blindfolded, past the field her grandfather had first turned, past the shelter belt of cottonwoods her father had planted in 1962, past the mailbox with the name Colston in faded black letters that the winter would eventually take, but hadn't yet. Now, let me tell you about Earl Colston, because you cannot understand what happened next without understanding who he was. Earl was not an educated man in the way the agricultural colleges meant when they used that word. He had never attended a seminar on modern farming practices. He had never sat through a presentation about leveraged expansion or input cost optimization. But he understood machines the way certain people understand music, intuitively, deeply, as a language rather than a system. He started teaching Vera when she was 7, not because he had a curriculum, because she was there and curious, and he believed that idle hands were a form of disrespect to the work. Every machine tells you what it needs, he told her once. When she was maybe 10 years old, both of them crouched beside the big Oliver tractor in the light of the open shed door. You just have to get quiet enough to hear it. Most people can't get that quiet. He pressed her small hand flat against the engine block, which was warm and faintly vibrating, like something alive. Feel that? That little shake right there? That's not how she should be running. That's her talking to you. He taught her to change oil at the right intervals, not the convenient ones. He taught her to read a service manual the way you read a legal document, slowly, out loud if you had to, stopping to look up the things you didn't understand. He taught her to lay out every part she removed in the exact sequence she removed it, on a clean rag, so that the reassembly told itself. You can always put something back together, he told her, if you don't lose track of the order. His most important possession was not the land itself. It was a green metal filing cabinet in the corner of the machine shed, fireproof, with a combination lock she had known since she was 12. Inside were 3 things: a complete set of service manuals for every piece of equipment on the farm, organized by machine, a series of wide-ruled spiral notebooks in which Earl had recorded every single repair he had ever made, every part number, every symptom and solution, dating back to 1959, and a hand-drawn diagram of the farm's tile drainage system that existed nowhere else because Earl had put it in himself over 30 years and never trusted anyone else to know where it ran. The notebooks were his real legacy, not wisdom in the abstract, wisdom written down, with part numbers. That first night after she left the bank, Vera didn't go inside the farmhouse. She went to the machine shed. She pulled the green filing cabinet's combination, her birthday, backward, and found the notebook labeled Gleaner 1979. The combine was a Gleaner L2, old enough to be temperamental, young enough to still have parts available if you knew where to look. She found her father's entry from 1984, coolant leak from cylinder head, traced a crack near exhaust port, replaced head, part number 713625540, sourced from Kowalski implement in Red Wing, 2-day lead time. She read it 3 times. Then she found the service manual, the relevant section flagged with a strip of masking tape, her father's penciled note in the margin. Check head bolt torque sequence first. Do not skip. She stood in the cold shed under the single bare bulb, with the smell of old oil and frost coming through the gaps in the tin walls. And she understood the problem not as a catastrophe, but as a sequence of steps. Her father had already walked this path. He had left her the map. The next morning she called Kowalski Implement in Red Wing at 7:30 the moment they opened. She gave them the part number without looking it up. The young man on the phone was quiet for a moment, surprised by the specificity. "Got one in stock," he said. "Where you shipping?" "I'm not," she said. "I'm coming to get it." She drove the 2 hours to Red Wing, paid for the cylinder head with the last of the household checking account, $940, and drove home with it wrapped in a moving blanket in the back seat of her car. She stopped once for gas and a cup of coffee she barely tasted. The repair took her 4 days, not because she was slow, because she was careful. She drained the cooling system. She labeled every hose with masking tape and a marker before she disconnected it. She pulled the intake and exhaust manifolds the way her father had taught her, setting each bolt in a piece of cardboard with a hand-drawn diagram of where it had come from, so she wouldn't have to guess during reassembly. The old cylinder head came off with a sound like an exhaled breath, the cracked surface visible once she cleaned away the gasket material. A hairline fracture running 3 inches from the exhaust port, exactly where her father's notes said it would be. She worked from 6 in the morning until 8 at night, breaking only to eat, to sit for 20 minutes in her father's chair at the kitchen table with a glass of water and her eyes closed, just breathing. On the 4th day, she filled the cooling system and started the engine. It ran rough for 2 minutes, then smoothed. She checked every joint. Nothing wept. She climbed into the cab, ran the header, listened to the cylinder drive engage with a clean, even sound. Her father's combine was ready to harvest. She brought in the corn over 11 days, alone. It was brutal in the way that physical work at its limit is always brutal, not dramatic, just unrelenting. She was in the cab by 6 and out of the field after dark, running the grain cart herself on the shorter passes, calling a neighbor's teenage son, Robbie Albers, to drive cart on the longer runs for $20 a day she couldn't really afford but couldn't do without. She ate sandwiches in the cab. She stopped when the machine needed greasing and did it herself, in the field, in the cold. She slept hard and dreamlessly and woke before her alarm most mornings, her body already counting the daylight hours before her mind caught up. The town watched, the way small towns watch, at the co-op, at the elevator, at the diner on Route 12, where the farm equipment guys had their coffee. They saw her truck going out early and coming back after dark. They saw the gleaner in the fields when they drove past. They heard from Robbie Albers' mother that the Colston girl was running the whole operation herself. Some of them felt sorry for her. Some of them felt uncomfortable in the way people feel uncomfortable when someone is doing something they thought was impossible. None of them knew about the ledger. Her father had run the farm on a cash basis as much as humanly possible. His operating loan was small, a line of credit for seed and fuel, paid down every fall after harvest, carried as close to zero as he could manage. He didn't believe in debt the way most people don't believe in certain weather, not as a moral position, but as a matter of practical dread. Interest works against you every single day, he had told her once. It doesn't take weekends. It doesn't take holidays. The bank's clock never stops. She had found that sentence written at the top of his first notebook, like a header, like a commandment. Her yield wasn't spectacular. It was decent. 162 bushels to the acre on the corn ground, a little below the county average because the summer had been dry and she hadn't had the capital to irrigate. But every bushel that went to the elevator went against the note, and by the first week of November, the operating loan was paid down to a number she could manage through winter. She did not buy anything she did not need. She wore her father's Carhartt until the lining tore, then sewed the lining back in. She learned to adjust the combine's feeder house tension herself, rather than calling a dealer technician at $90 an hour. She bartered 2 days of her labor helping a neighboring farmer, Walt Dunning, repair his tile drainage outlet in exchange for the use of his grain auger for 2 weekends. Every dollar that didn't leave the farm was a dollar that stayed. She was living the way her father had lived. She was living the way his notebook said to live. There was a night in January, deep in the cold, that Minnesota saves for the people who think they've made it through the worst of winter, when the power went out in an ice storm and didn't come back for 6 days. The farmhouse pipes froze on the third night. She caught it before any of them burst, but just barely. She was up at 2 in the morning with a heat gun and a flashlight, working her way through the crawl space under the kitchen with the temperature in the single digits outside and not much warmer where she was. When she came back in, she sat at the kitchen table in her coat and her hat, and she let herself feel the full weight of it. Not just the cold, not just the pipes. All of it. The loneliness that settled in after Glenn left and had never really lifted. The phone calls from her mother, who meant well, but kept asking when she was going to be sensible. The slow, grinding arithmetic of a farm that was surviving but not comfortable, that was hers but was not yet safe. The sheer, bone-level exhaustion of doing every single thing alone. She thought about the Minneapolis group. She thought about what Mr. Caldwell had said. Leave you with a check large enough to start over. She got up, because sitting down with thoughts like that is how you lose. She went to the machine shed, because it was the only place that felt entirely like hers. She opened the green cabinet. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. She just needed the smell of it. The paper and the oil and the cold steel. To feel like her father was still in the room. In the back of the top drawer, tucked behind the equipment registration folders, she found an envelope she had never opened, her name on the front, in his handwriting. The paper was yellowed at the edges. He must have put it there years ago. She sat down on the overturned 5-gallon bucket he had always used as a stool and opened it. The note inside was short, 4 sentences. Vera, the land is not yours to keep, it is yours to care for. There is a difference, and the difference is everything. She read it until the words stopped being words and became something else. Until the doubt that had been sitting at the back of her chest for months quietly got up and walked out of the room. She went back inside, found the main water shutoff behind the basement stairs, bled the pressure out of the lines methodically, section by section, then traced the freeze back to the kitchen supply line and thawed it with the heat gun and a patience she hadn't known she possessed until exactly that moment. By morning, the water was running. The sign that the farm was going to be all right wasn't dramatic. It didn't announce itself. It came in the form of her soil in the spring. Earl had always rotated his crops: corn, soybeans, oats, with a winter rye cover crop on the ground he rested. He composted. He ran cattle on the lower pasture ground and moved them in a pattern that kept the grass from being stripped. His neighbors had long since switched to continuous corn on most of their acres, pouring on anhydrous ammonia to compensate for what the monoculture took from the soil. They called his methods old-fashioned. He called their methods borrowing against a debt that would come due. In the spring of 1988, Vera's fields came out of the snow looking different from her neighbors. The cover crop had held the topsoil. The earthworms were already working. When she pushed a soil probe down into the east field on a warm April afternoon, The core that came up was dark and loose and smelled like something living. Her neighbor's field, across the road, was pale and compacted, the kind of soil that runs off in heavy rain instead of absorbing it. Her yields that second year were not record-breaking, but her input costs were lower than anyone else in the township, and the ground was getting better instead of worse. Then, in the fall of 1988, something shifted in the credit markets that the farm country hadn't fully absorbed yet. Interest rates that had climbed through the early decade had broken the backs of the heavily leveraged operations, and though the worst of it was a few years past, the reverberations were still moving through the county like a slow wave. Farms that had expanded on borrowed money in the late 1970s and early 1980s were still working out from under it. Several of her neighbors, good people, honest people, were in restructuring conversations with the bank that they hadn't expected to have when they signed the notes. The for sale signs began appearing, not a flood of them, a quiet, steady trickle that felt worse, somehow, than a flood. Vera's farm had no restructuring to do. She owed what she had always owed, an operating line she paid down every fall, and a property tax bill she covered in December. She wasn't getting rich, but she was standing. It was a Tuesday in the spring of 1989 when Mr. Caldwell's car pulled into her driveway. She was in the machine shed adjusting the planter's row unit, springs ahead of the season, the parts laid out in sequence on the concrete floor. She heard his car and came to the shed door, still holding a socket wrench. He got out and stood for a moment looking at the farm, the tidy fence lines, the clean equipment, the fields beyond showing the dark, healthy color of soil that had been cared for through the winter. He looked older than he had 2 years ago. He walked over slowly, his hands in his coat pockets. "I drive past here sometimes," he said, "on my way out to the Dunning place." He paused. "Your corn last year, it looked better than anybody else's in the county." Vera wiped her hands on a shop rag. "It was a decent year," she said. He shook his head. "No, Vera, it was a rough year for most people. Your ground just didn't know it." He looked at the shed behind her, at the organized tools, the labeled parts bins, the green cabinet in the corner that she hadn't moved or changed since her father's time. "I owe you an honest conversation," he said. 2 years ago, I sat across the desk from you and offered you the easiest solution I could see. I thought I was being practical. I thought I was seeing the situation clearly." He paused, turning his hat in his hands. "I wasn't seeing it at all. I was seeing a young woman alone, and I was seeing broken equipment, and I was thinking about my own institution's exposure. I was not seeing what your father had built here. I was not seeing what he had given you." He met her eyes. "I was wrong. I'm sorry." Vera looked at him for a moment. He meant it. She could tell the difference between an apology that was meant and one that was offered to smooth something over. "My father trusted this bank," she said. "He believed in the relationship." "He was right to," Mr. Caldwell said. "I should have honored that." He put his hat back on. "You've got a line of credit here for the spring inputs, and I want you to know it will be there in the fall as well. Whatever you need to run this operation properly." That's not a commercial offer. That's me doing what I should have done from the start. He reached out his hand. She shook it. The socket wrench was still in her other hand. Her grip was stronger than his. He drove away down the county road, and she stood in the shed door and watched him go, and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for a long time. It was 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in October, when she heard a vehicle on the gravel and looked up from the fence she was mending to see Glenn's truck at the top of the driveway. He sat in it for a long moment before he got out. When he did, he looked like a man who had rehearsed what he was going to say and then forgotten it on the way over. He walked down the drive slowly, his hands in his jacket pockets, and stopped 15 feet from where she was standing with a pair of fencing pliers. He looked at the farm. He looked at the fields, the cattle in the pasture, the old gleaner parked clean by the equipment shed, the farmhouse with the new porch boards she'd replaced herself in August. "People in town say you're the only one in the township who's not upside down," he said. His voice was careful and quiet, with none of the hard certainty she remembered from before. She didn't say anything. She waited. "I thought I understood what was practical," he said. "I thought I was seeing the situation better than you were." He looked at his shoes for a moment. "I was looking at what was broken. You were looking at what could be fixed. There's a difference I didn't know how to see." He lifted his eyes to hers. "I came to say I was wrong. About the farm. About what you were capable of. About what your father left you." He stopped. "I'm sorry, Vera." It was the second apology she'd received that year. The first had settled something in her chest. This one settled something deeper. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but the last of the old bitterness. It left quietly the way a headache leaves, without announcing itself. "I know," she said. He nodded. They stood in the October light for a moment, two people who had been something to each other and were still figuring out what they were now. He drove away. She went back to the fence. "Let me take you forward, now." Because this story doesn't end in the fields of 1989. Vera Colston is in her late 50s now. Her hair has gone the color of October corn silk, and her hands are the hands of someone who has spent 30 years working with them. Capable and direct, the hands of a woman who has solved 1,000 problems with them. The farm is still 840 acres. She never expanded. Expansion would have required debt, and she had her father's voice in her ear about that for the rest of her life. The farmhouse has a new roof, put on by a crew she supervised herself. The machine shed has been sided and insulated. In the corner, the green metal filing cabinet is still there. Her father's notebooks have been joined by her own. Same wide-ruled format, same blocky handwriting habit she picked up somewhere along the way. Same part numbers and symptoms and solutions. The farm's memory growing one page at a time. The Gleaner L2 is retired now, parked in the back of the shed like a beloved old dog, given a warm place to sleep out of the cold. There is a newer combine, not new but newer, bought with cash in 2001. After a particularly good season, it runs well because she reads its service schedule the way her father read his. The neighbors who once pitied her now call her when they have equipment problems they can't figure out. Young farmers come out to the farm sometimes. Kids fresh from agricultural programs at the state university, full of data models and satellite imagery and subscription soil testing services. And she listens to all of it politely. And then she shows them things none of their professors knew to teach. One afternoon in late September, she is in the machine shed with her niece's son, a 22-year-old named Cooper, who has come to spend a season learning what farming actually is as opposed to what the textbooks say it is. He is eager and smart and slightly overwhelmed, the way good students sometimes are when they realize the subject is larger than the course. She is showing him her father's notebooks. Not hers, her father's. Cooper is reading the 1964 entry for a hydraulic repair on a tractor that has been gone for decades, and he looks up with an expression she recognizes. It's the expression of someone who has just understood that knowledge doesn't expire. He wrote all of this down, Cooper says. Not a question. Every repair, every part number, every problem, and how he solved it. She closes the notebook gently and sets it back in the cabinet. Your grandfather's generation thought that knowledge lived in the person. If you needed to know something, you went and found the person who knew it. My father thought different. He thought knowledge should outlast the person who learned it. She looks at Cooper. Write things down. Write down everything. When you fix something, Write down what was wrong, what you used, what you'd do different. Don't trust your memory. Memory is a poor filing system. She picks up a wrench and nods toward the planter in the center of the floor. Now, before we adjust those row cleaners, I want you to tell me what you think is wrong with them. Don't look at the manual yet. Just look. The machine will give you a starting place if you're patient enough to look at it long enough. Cooper crouches in front of the planter, studying it with the earnest intensity of someone who has been told that the machine is speaking and is determined to hear it. Vera watches him. She thinks about her father crouching beside that Oliver tractor in the open shed door, pressing her 7-year-old hand against the warm engine block. Feel that? That's her talking to you. The knowledge is moving forward. That is what knowledge does if you give it a place to go. There is a particular kind of stubbornness that people mistake for sentiment. They see a woman holding on to her father's farm when every practical voice is telling her to let go, and they call it grief or pride or an inability to face reality. They are looking at the surface. They are not looking at what is underneath, the notebooks in the fireproof cabinet, the service manuals with their penciled margins, the accumulated intelligence of a man who believed that knowing how a thing worked was worth more than the money it would take to replace it. The bankers and the husbands and the neighbors saw a problem to be liquidated. Vera Colston saw a library, and a library tended properly is not a relic. It is a living thing. It grows. It passes itself forward. It outlasts every argument for practicality and every voice that says the old ways are finished, and every winter storm that sends you to the shed at 2 a.m. with a heat gun and a prayer. The land, her father wrote, is not yours to keep. It is yours to care for. She has been caring for it for 30 years. The fields are darker now than when she started, richer, deeper, more alive. They are the testimony of every decision she made that the practical people told her was wrong. She will pass the notebooks to Cooper. He will add his own pages. The farm will continue to be exactly what her father believed it could be, not a monument to sentiment, but a proof of principle. The work, as it has always been, is the answer.